I ask the member for Abbotsford South to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the warmth of spring begins to blossom and the natural beauty of this great province unfolds, showing signs of life, renewal, I think it is timely to reflect and give thanks to whomever your creator may be. May the beauty of spring and the warmth of the sun give us hope, give us the strength to understand our darkest days are behind us. Let us pause, look to the splendor of nature, acknowledge hope does bloom eternal. Spring reminds us of nature's cycles, the innate power in all living things to overcome obstacles placed before them, yearning to thrive. Spring is also the time of work, families, communities, combining forces, planting seeds, tending fields in the hopes of a bountiful harvest. So may the members of this House and the citizens of this magnificent province unite our efforts and resolve to beat this pandemic. Together we have the strength, together we have hope.
Introduction by members. Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today to introduce some very important people. Cassandra O'Keefe, Davida Solomon, and Shad Martin, who are all police call takers and 911 dispatchers in Central Saanich. They're here in anticipation of Emergency Services Dispatchers and 911 Awareness Week, which is the week of April the 4th. I'd like to thank them for the important work that they do and would encourage all members of this Assembly to make them most welcome.
Member for Coquitlam, Burke Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize a special birthday for a special person, former MLA and Cabinet Minister John Cashore. John served as MLA for Coquitlam-Mayardville from 1986 to 2001. He was Minister of Environment, Lands and Parks and Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. John was instrumental in designating Pinecone Provincial Park, negotiating the Nisga'a Treaty in principle, and overseeing the doubling of the province's protected and parks areas. I ask all members join me in wishing one of my political heroes and an all-around great guy, John Cashore, a happy 86th birthday.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I want to join with the member for Coquitlam Burke Mountain and wishing a very happy birthday to John Cashore. And also, while I'm on my feet, a member in my community, Cody Bell, a friend of the Speaker's office, a friend of many in this House. Don't give him your phone. Cody Bell, yeah. He knows who he is. Cody Bell turns 34 today. Happy birthday, Cody. The restrictions will be coming down. Be patient. Someday soon you'll be able to go in and wreak havoc in the Speaker's office once again.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
It was March 22nd of 1923, almost 98 years ago to the day. A young Foster Hewitt calling one of his first games as a hockey play-by-play announcer. He shoots, he scores, he roared over the radio, and hockey's clarion call was born. Foster's unmistakable voice and that timeless phrase forever knit into the fabric of a nation. This past year has been difficult in so many ways, but as we all look forward to the return of some sense of normalcy, we at long last have something to cheer. With the blessing of the Provincial Health Officer, the BC Division of the Western Hockey League begins a shortened season tomorrow in Kamloops, with the mighty Kamloops Blazers hosting the Vancouver Giants. The Victoria Royals, Vancouver Giants, Prince George Cougars, and there's another team from Kelowna. Their name escapes me. The Sockets or the Rock Pockets, something like that. And the Kamloops Blazers are set to kick off a 24-game schedule playing in two hub centres, Kamloops and Kelowna. Mr. Speaker, we need this. The ability to cheer on our young athletes as they pursue their goal of greatness, even to perhaps play in the NHL one day. While we're still not at the point where fans will be allowed to watch these games in person, fans will be following the play-by-play of their beloved teams on TV, live streams, and radio. And no, it won't be like the good old days just yet, but the head coaches will no doubt have their young guns ready to perform, and how sweet it will be to once again discuss the action and the rivalries around the water cooler. With the WHL season set to begin tomorrow, and the BC Hockey League also ready to start a 20-game schedule on April 2nd, truer words have never been spoken or sung. Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight. Tension grows, the whistle blows, and the puck goes down the ice. The goalie jumps, and the players bump, and the fans all go insane. Someone roars, Bobby scores, at the good old hockey game.
Well, let's see if the member for North Coast beats that. Member for North Coast, can you beat that?
I'm afraid I don't think I can, at least not today. Today, I'm recognizing emergency service dispatchers and 911 Awareness Week, which will be celebrating the week of April 4th. Each day, our emergency service dispatchers and 911 operators receive approximately 5,000 calls. These call takers and dispatchers are the first of the first responders, the voice that people need to hear when they are in a time of great need. British Columbians have experienced many emergencies: the 1996 snowstorm, the 2003 firestorm, the wildfires of 2017 and 2018, and the flooding in Grand Forks. But at no other time have we been activated in a state of provincial emergency for so long. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has made us face unexpected and unprecedented challenges, and dispatchers and operators have risen to the task to support higher demands on police officers, firefighters, and ambulance paramedics. We're still making our way through this provincial emergency, this pandemic. My home community, Prince Rupert, has been hit hard in recent months, and we are so thankful to have received vaccines last week. But no British Columbian anywhere in the province has come through the year unscathed. Beyond COVID-19 itself, I know this pandemic has caused great strains on our communities and impacted our collective mental health. I know this past year has made the work of emergency dispatchers more complicated, but we're so thankful there is someone there to answer our calls. I ask the members of this House to join me in recognizing the great work that BC's emergency service dispatchers and 911 operators do day in and day out for all British Columbians, and to please extend a warm welcome to those that are here in the House with us today. Thank you.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Starting at sundown this Saturday, March 27, Jewish communities across British Columbia and around the world will begin the Seder, the main ritual of Passover to honor the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and their transition from slavery to freedom. What is typically a celebration surrounded by friends and family is going to look very different for many Jewish Canadians, and this will be the second time Passover has taken place during the pandemic. As challenging as this is for many BC families, the story of Passover is a story of resilience and a celebration of the incredible challenges our Jewish communities have overcome in their history. And I know that many will still find ways to safely and virtually celebrate with their loved ones. In recent years, BC has seen a disturbing rise in incidents of anti-Semitism and hate crimes against members of our Jewish communities. Earlier this week, many of us in this House rose to reaffirm our commitment to eliminating any and all forms of racial and religious intolerance, and I offer my deepest thanks. No British Columbian should ever feel fear or shame because of their religious practices and identity. Hopefully, this time next year, we can all enjoy Passover surrounded by friends and family like we are used to. But for now, I would like to wish you all a very happy Passover. Hag Pesach Sameach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Chilliwack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to talk about an organization that has played an important role in my constituency for over 25 years, the Downtown Chilliwack Business Improvement Association, led by Executive Director Trevor McDonald. The BIA works with over 300 businesses across Chilliwack and is led by a dedicated, diverse, and talented volunteer board. They work with new businesses in Chilliwack, such as District 1881, a pedestrian-focused development that houses retail shops with artisan goods, breweries, restaurants, coffee, offices, and residential units. These folks also work with long-standing businesses that have made Chilliwack's historic downtown great for decades. Some of these businesses include Mary's on Wellington, which has been there for over 32 years, Michael's on Main Nail and Hair Studio that has been in the same location since 1949, and Locke's Pharmacy, a family-run business that has been open in Chilliwack's downtown for over 70 years. The work that the people at the BIA do in supporting new and veteran businesses not only contributes immensely to the local economy in Chilliwack, but they have been integral in supporting local businesses in Chilliwack through the challenges of the pandemic and ensuring that we can look forward to an economic recovery. By prioritizing live events, public art, multiculturalism, and initiatives to make Chilliwack more green, the Downtown Chilliwack Business Improvement Association plays a vital role in what makes Chilliwack so wonderful. I hope you will all join me in applauding the hard work of Trevor McDonald and his team, and I hope that the next time you are in Chilliwack, you get a chance to stop by downtown. As Trevor says, without question, we're open for business.
Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We as legislators have complicated and sometimes conflicting roles that we play. On the one hand, as lawmakers, we must be serious about upholding the laws of this province and this country. And yet at the same time, as politicians, we come to this place with a sense of a vision for the future and ideas about which laws need to be reshaped, removed, replaced. And when we look to the history of Canada and the role that civil disobedience has played in that history, we can see that it has helped to move us beyond unjust laws and moved us forward in our efforts to protect fundamental rights and freedoms. From the suffragist movement in the 19th and early 20th centuries, to the Vancouver Island coal strike in 1912, to the ongoing Black Lives Matter gatherings and marches last summer, peaceful protests and civil disobedience have shaped and continue to shape our social, political, and legal landscapes in BC and across Canada. In his article on civil disobedience in Canada, historian Keith Fleming contends that, quote, socially disruptive actions have become as Canadian as maple syrup. And as the former Chief Justice of the Manitoba Court of Appeal, Samuel Friedman, stated, there have been instances in human history in which disobedience to law has proved a benefit to law and society. We have also seen an increasing number of Indigenous leaders and communities in recent decades make stands for their territories and rights, from Oka in 1990 to the Wet'suwet'en protests across BC and Canada last year. And here in BC, the largest peaceable disobedience in Canadian history, with 12,000 people who gathered over the summer of 1993 and nearly 900 arrests, began at Kennedy River Bridge in what is known worldwide as the War of the Woods in Clayoquot Sounds.
Member for Surrey Panorama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last year, so much has changed for us. How we celebrate births, how we do weddings, but also how we say our final goodbyes and how we grieve. Now more than ever, families are faced with tough decisions when losing a loved one. They must decide which family members will attend the service in person. And for the friends and family who aren't able to attend, how can families include them and help to say goodbye? And I want to thank those who are working in the front line in this area to deal with this. Today, I would like to acknowledge the wonderful staff at Valley View Funeral Home and Cemetery who helped not only my family when my mother passed away, but who has helped countless other families say goodbye in these trying times. Valley View has been an anchor in my riding since 1954. With 87 acres of beautifully designed gardens and natural landscapes, it is home to the largest display of outdoor architect features in all of BC. When COVID regulations for funeral homes were put in place, Valley View quickly pivoted to ensure that families were able to mourn together with a hybrid model of in-person and virtual services, taking on the roles of audio and visual experts, masters of ceremony, family support, all while ensuring that COVID-19 regulations are being followed. The wonderful staff at Valley View have learned how to support those who are grieving, bringing families together while staying apart. I want to thank everyone who works at Valley View and at other funeral homes right across this province and country. On behalf of myself and many other families in Surrey who have had to say goodbye to the loved ones in these unprecedented times. Thank you for your strength, your kindness, and your dedication, ensuring that those we have lost are cared for, and for providing opportunities to commemorate the lives of those we have lost.
Members, the member for Vancouver West End has asked for leave to make an introduction. Is leave granted? Aye. Member, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to wish my husband, Romy, a very, very happy anniversary. 21 years ago on Saturday, we met for the first time, and I must say, Honourable Speaker, it was love at first sight for me. For him, I'm not so sure, but we watched the sunset together that night, and really since that day, we've been watching sunrises and sunsets together ever since. 11 years ago, we got married, and I just really want to wish him the absolute best anniversary and thank him for being there with me and for being an incredible father to our son, Deb, as well. Happy anniversary, and thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Premier assured British Columbians that when it comes to vaccine supply, it is, and I quote, full steam ahead. Over 1 million doses of Pfizer and 846,000 Moderna shots are set to arrive in British Columbia this week. Thousands of AstraZeneca shots expire on April the 2nd, and there are more on the way. But now there is confusion and concern about the growing number of unused COVID-19 doses because of the lack of a province-wide online registration and booking system. With 5 different health authorities, 5 different phone numbers, and one of them partially online, people are worried, and rightly so, about how a province-wide online and booking registration system will be up and running on April the 6th. The Premier made a promise. He said that the transition from phone booking to a single online registration system will be open on April the 6th. So today, will the Premier confirm that the system will be in place and running at full capacity on April the 6th?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for her question. And I can confirm that it is our belief and strongly held view that on the 6th of April we will have our province-wide online system up and running. And I want to acknowledge, as I have the opportunity, the extraordinary work of people right across the province and all the health authorities. And the member will know, and other members will know, that we have 5 health authorities and the First Nations Health Authority as well that know best what goes on in their communities. And I used an example yesterday of the mass immunization in Prince Rupert undertaken by Northern Health. And all of us will know that we get correspondence. We get casework in our constituency offices, oftentimes frustrated by health authorities not meeting the expectations of patients, of British Columbians. And I was heartened to hear from the member for North Coast that the uniform enthusiasm for the hard work of Northern Health spread right through Prince Rupert and into Port Ed. So when there's agreement between those two communities, you know you're on the right track.
Leader of the Official Opposition on supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and all of us are absolutely grateful that people across British Columbia are receiving vaccinations, but we're also equally concerned that the number of unused doses yesterday actually exceeded 200,000. So vaccines arrive in British Columbia, and what we want to ensure is that they get into the arms of British Columbians as quickly as possible. This is not about the individual health authorities. It's about the fact that this Premier and government had over a year to plan, to prepare, and ensure that there was an online province-wide system in place to make sure that those shots were used as expeditiously as possible. And yet this week, unbelievably, the NDP took the opportunity to send a fundraising email using the pandemic, basically saying that the vaccine rollout is so far ahead that now we could use some donations so we can focus on other things. How appropriate is that? Frankly, the Premier needs to keep his eye on the ball here. We have in British Columbia today over 200,000 doses of vaccine that are sitting waiting to get into the arms of British Columbians. It requires a province-wide booking and registration system. So again, to the Premier, he's made a promise. He said finally on April the 6th, we're going to have that system. My question is very specific. Will that transition from phone in 5 health authorities to an online system be fully operational and effectively operating on April the 6th?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And the straight answer to the member is the same as the first one. Yes, it will be up and running. And I want to just unpack some of the comments the member made. We have had a year of global pandemic. We have not had a year of supply of vaccine. We have had a year of people holding fast against an extraordinary enemy, one that's not seen, one that knows no boundaries, it knows no ethnicity, it knows no height, it knows no gender. And Canadians and British Columbians particularly have been resilient in that fight against COVID-19. We do not have unallocated vaccine. We're not storing things up for a sunny day. We are taking the vaccines as they come, and we're apportioning them as the public health officer determines is in the best interest of quelling outbreaks, the best interest of going through the vulnerable populations. We are on to 75-year-olds today, 74-year-olds tomorrow, and that will continue as we move into April and into the next phase of the vaccination program. I do also want to say that there are headlines and stories about concerns about supply. We've had these challenges, not just British Columbians, but all Canadians, because we don't have domestic supply. And that blame goes back over decades of federal irresponsibility, quite frankly, over successive governments of different political stripes, allowing that sector to atrophy and be replaced by offshore supply. So we're dependent on others to get vaccines into British Columbia, but we are absolutely committed to making sure that every drop of vaccine that arrives in British Columbia goes into a British Columbian so that we can get back to normal as fast as possible.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, maybe the Premier doesn't watch the numbers as closely as we are, because we're watching the amount of unused doses rise, and it's alarming. We're behind the 8 ball. Not just with the lack of preparation in creating an online booking system that every other jurisdiction across Canada seems to have, but also the lack of plan for community pharmacies. Only in the last few weeks have they even been contacted, while other Canadian jurisdictions, well, they've announced their plans to engage pharmacists months ago. Pharmacies are critical to preventing stockpiles of these unused and, worse yet, almost expiring vaccines. But they need 6 weeks to actually mobilize. The Premier's decision to not involve pharmacists is costing valuable time and results in more transmission, the growth of variants, hospitalizations, and, sadly, death. To the Premier, where's the plan to empower our province's highly trained community pharmacists to join the fight?
Minister of Health.
Well, Honourable Speaker, I don't know where to start with such a list of quite inaccurate statements. As of Sunday, we had 1 day of supply of Pfizer. We were left with 14,000 doses because we used it all up to that point. Then this week, we've received doses of more than well over 100,000 doses that have arrived and are now being used. So when the member states that there are unused doses not being used because of the vaccination campaign, this is just simply incorrect on the facts. When she asserts, as she did, that is leading to people passing away, she's simply incorrect as to the facts. Yesterday was a record day for vaccinations in British Columbia. Over 27,000, 610,000 doses have been delivered. More than 520,000 first doses have been delivered. And the reason those numbers are the cases is that's the vaccine we've received. You cannot deliver more Pfizer than we had delivered as of Sunday. And then we receive more, and then we deliver more. And the idea that 105,000 doses would arrive on Monday and they'd be immediately delivered, which seems to be the assertion of the member, is, shall I say, not consistent with reality. In any event, we have a vaccination campaign that has been well laid out, that's focused on those that need it most. Its effects already have been profound in long-term care, and I appreciate the support of all members, because I know all members are doing this, in ensuring that members of the public have the information they need to go forward. Community pharmacy will play a central role in this as well as we go forward and as we get more doses to immunize people with.
Thank you, Minister. Member for, Leader of Third Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Today, the BC Supreme Court is hearing Forest Company Teal Jones's application for an injunction against the protesters at Fairy Creek. If the injunction is granted, we could see people arrested for attempting to stop preparations for logging in the last intact ancient forest valley on southern Vancouver Island. This could take place no less in the Premier's own riding, on the watch of an NDP government that has promised to do things differently on old growth, on the watch of a Premier who committed during the recent snap election to implement all of the old growth panel's recommendations, including immediate deferrals in ancient forests just like this one. Honourable Speaker, if Fairy Creek doesn't qualify for immediate protections, I'm not sure what does. My question is to every member of government, really, but I'll direct my question to the Premier. Is the Premier and his caucus okay with this being their legacy? Or will they step up and come to the table with real economic alternatives to logging old growth and provide a way forward to save Fairy Creek?
Minister of Forests, Land, Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member of the third party, leader of the third party. BC forests are a big part of what makes our province so unique and so special. And our government knows that old growth trees are an integral part of a healthy ecosystem. And for many, many years, the former Liberal government, they took an unbalanced and unsustainable approach to managing our old growth forests, and we are making different choices. Our government is bringing in a fundamental shift in forestry to protect and preserve old growth forests and for today and for years to come. And we will do this while supporting forest workers and forest-dependent communities. You know, we received clear advice and clear recommendations from the independent panel on how we can do this, and we are dedicated to implementing the 14 recommendations, and the work has already started. In fact, as a first step, we worked with Indigenous nations and government-to-government discussions across the province to look at 9 deferred areas where we deferred old-growth forests that are protected in those 9 areas, and we will continue to do more. We know that this is just a first step, and there is much more to do, and we will do that.
Leader of Third Party on supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm actually astonished that my question was specifically about Fairy Creek. The Minister of Forests didn't mention it once. And just to be clear, this is the last intact old-growth valley south of Clayoquot Sound on Vancouver Island, the last one. And so 30 years from now, we will have to look at our grandchildren and say, hey, either we let it go because it didn't matter, we didn't value it, your future, your ability to go into an intact old-growth forest didn't matter enough. Or we say, this is the moment to make the decision, this is the time, this is the government that promised to do it, and they're going to follow through on it. Making different choices, following the advice of the panel. The advice of the panel was immediate deferrals on exactly this kind of watershed and ancient forest. This government has an opportunity in front of them right now to show that they actually meant what they said when they made promises in a snap election that we didn't need to have. The question is to the Premier, Honourable Speaker, will his government rise to the moment of this important decision? Halt the road building and preparation for logging in this intact rainforest and come to the table with financial alternatives for supports in order to provide an actual long-term solution to save this watershed.
Minister of Forests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I too have a vision. I have a vision about our forest industry. I have a vision about the forests in this province, and I want to ensure that we have a sustained, well-managed forest industry. And I also have a vision, and maybe the member would like to listen to it. So my vision is, I also have grandchildren, and I want, if my grandchildren choose, they are from the age of 4 to 20. If my grandchildren choose, I want them, when they are ready, I want them to have the ability to work in a well-managed forestry, but I also want them to have the ability to be able to walk in an old-growth forest anywhere in this province, because there is old-growth forest, 10,000 hectares of old-growth forest across this province, which have not been logged and are protected and will not be logged. And the member is inaccurate in her numbers. She likes to put out numbers. I don't know. I would love to meet with her to talk to her and have a briefing on where she's getting her numbers from, because they are inaccurate. We are dedicated to implementing the recommendations from the Old Growth Forest report, and we will do that. We are also dedicated to working in government-to-government discussions with Indigenous nations. And we are doing just that with the Pachadat Nation. We are doing that with other nations across this province. And those are government-to-government discussions that are confidential and would be inappropriate for me to discuss in a public venue. But we are committed. We are committed to continuing through this important work, having those discussions with Indigenous nations, talking to the workers, talking to industry, talking to communities who are dependent. And we will continue to do that.
Thank you, Minister.
Because we want to ensure that there's old-growth forests in this province for years to come.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, while the Premier doled out $645,000 for one single-user toilet in the city of Vancouver, he has completely botched the Small Business Recovery Grant Program for small businesses. South Thompson Inn owner David Patrican had this to say, and I quote, "In 2019, we invested in upgrades, which resulted in us not being profitable for that year. This makes us ineligible to receive the recovery grant," end quote. Ohana Deli owner Bobby Lyle said, and I quote, "Our life savings went into building our business, and our revenues have been down between 50% and 100% depending on the month because we haven't been in business for the required 18 months. So we're ineligible. If all else fails, we would happily take the toilet paper holder from that new bathroom in Vancouver. It must be worth at least $10,000, end quote. Unfortunately, it's too late for Lisa's School of Dance, which is closing its doors forever. Owner Lisa Du had this to say, and I quote, "There have been countless tears, months of sleepless nights, and anxiety-ridden days. Between financial losses and the government's let's wait and see mindset, there is no way to sustain our business. There isn't enough support for small business right now," end quote. Mr. Speaker, no further meetings or consultations, engagements are going to help these small businesses or the thousands of others just like them who to this day are still not eligible for the Business Recovery Grant. So my question is this: will the Premier make further changes to the eligibility requirements of the Business Recovery Grant so that businesses like Ohana Deli and the South Thompson Inn will not have to make the same gut-wrenching decision to close their doors forever, just like Lisa's School of Dance?
Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. He mentioned some of the businesses. My office did reach out to his office. I'm sure he's aware yesterday when he raised these businesses in particular, and we offered to reach out to the businesses directly to help them navigate what programs and supports are available to them. The member will know December 21st.
Members, let's hear the answer.
The member will know December 21st, we went to the business community and said, what changes would you like? We accepted all their changes at that time, Honourable Speaker. We saw a steady increase in applications. Then we followed up with them in February and said, what additional changes do you think could be used or required to make the program more accessible and more inclusive to more businesses? And we accepted those changes as well. We're trying to be as flexible and nimble as we can. We know the needs are changing for businesses as the pandemic changes, and we've been adjusting accordingly. Honourable Speaker, we're proud on this side of the House, and the members should be proud as well. Highest per capita supports in all of Canada, BC, we're providing right now. Honourable Speaker,
Minister will continue.
Honourable Speaker, between all the supports the province is providing, as well as the dollars Canada is providing, we've been able to help a lot of businesses. Even struggling political parties have benefited from the dollars.
Member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, sadly, on April the 1st, the Premier and his government will once again discriminate against the 17,000 workers who choose not to become a member of a trade union and work in the community social services sector. Here's what Ernie Batts, who's Executive Director of the Spectrum Society for Community Living, says, quote, "We have tried for years to get the Premier to take the issue of pay equity seriously and have been met with inattention and inaction. The only explanation we receive is that they have made the decision to compensate people less if they are not part of a union." The wages of 32,000 frontline workers in BC's community social services sector are funded directly by the province. The 17,000 workers who choose not to belong to a union are not getting the same wage increase as others merely because they exercised that choice and that right. They are being discriminated against by this government for exercising their rights, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier end the discrimination? Will he demonstrate that his government is prepared to abide by the same standard they call upon others to exercise and end the discrimination that it is perpetrating against 17,000 women and men in this important sector?
Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for his question. This is a historical issue, one that I'm really proud that our government is taking on head on. People who work in the community social service sector, who I know and who I work with and I've worked with in the past, are valued community members, valued people in our social service support sector, and they are appreciated. And our continued discussion with the sector, something that we've done that the previous government didn't do, we're actually addressing these issues. We're getting together and working collaboratively to find a solution, and I expect that work is going to continue in an atmosphere of cooperation, and that is the continued work of our government, and I thank the member for the question.
Member for West Vancouver, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, new child care regulations are taking place on April the 1st. These are going to result in the loss of thousands of child care spaces and financial hardship on child care providers. You've already heard directly from a lot of these providers. They're very upset, and these pleas have been ignored. Here's another one from yesterday. Nurture Early Childhood Education Centre here in Victoria holds a wait list of 180 families. Mr. Speaker, as a direct result of these new regulations, they are cancelling plans for 2 new facilities with 60 affordable spaces for preschool-aged children. This is what Jennifer Delaney has to say about the April 1 changes, quote, "It will have devastating effects on the child care sector. This will negatively and severely impact the creation of new child care spaces in British Columbia," end quote. Will the Premier reconsider this devastating change before thousands of child care spaces are lost on April 1st?
Minister of State for Child Care.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I want to emphasize that our fee reduction program is a program to bring relief to BC families. And during the past 3.5 short years, we have brought a fee reduction to tens and thousands of families in BC. That has never happened before. And we're proud of the work that we're doing. And over 90% of providers have joined our fee reduction program, which is an optional program. And we will need to make sure when we're using public dollars to support childcare and support fee reduction for parents, that there has to be accountability. And this new measure is really to provide a level playing field. And we've heard a lot from existing providers asking for a level playing field to make sure that there's accountability when a new childcare facility wants to apply and join this optional program. Honourable Speaker, our government has done a lot in the past 3.5 short years to make sure for the first time in BC's history, childcare fees is going down for BC parents after years of neglect from the former BC Liberal government.
Thank you. Member for Fraser-Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The report left out by the representative for Children and Youth tells heartbreaking stories about the impact of the pandemic on families. I quote, "It is the representative's view that many families and caregivers are reaching the breaking point. The disruption of the pandemic continues to reverberate in the lives of children and youth with special needs," end quote. The representative made a very clear recommendation, calling on this government to restore pandemic supports of $225 a month for 1 year. To the Premier, will he restore the pandemic benefits that are desperately needed for children and youth with special needs?
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for the question as well. And I would like to thank the representative for Children and Youth, and especially thank all the families who helped the representative's office in creating that report. And I share many of the representative's concerns, Honourable Speaker, and we did actually roll out some emergency measures during the pandemic because we recognised the struggle facing these families especially during and on a daily basis. Many families are struggling, juggling daily life and taking care of their families, but especially during this pandemic. And what families said to us, Honourable Speaker, was they wanted flexibility in funding. And we provided that flexibility in their respite funding, and we've extended that emergency measure to the end of March 2022.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, in Abbotsford, the mum of an Indigenous teen who was found dead in a closet of a group home last September is seeking answers. She wants to know why it took 4 days for Trayvon to be found by staff in the closet where he hung himself. She wants to know why staff threw his belongings in the dumpster. Answers have not been forthcoming from this government, though, sadly, Mr. Speaker. Trayvon's mother has been forced to set up a GoFundMe page in order to hire a lawyer to seek answers. So, Mr. Speaker, does the Premier believe that a GoFundMe campaign is the only way for a grieving mother to get appropriate answers about the death of her child that was in care?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for raising this question. In situations like this, it's an absolute tragedy, and my heart goes out to the family and everybody who knew the young person and knew the family and were involved. As the member will know, it is not possible for me as the Minister to comment on any individual situations or even comment on whether the Ministry has been involved with the family. Thank you.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson on supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this government spent years bringing up issues like this. This situation, unfortunately, happens when youth are in care, and families seek answers. The Minister does not want to speak about this particular individual case, so I'll reframe the question then. Has the Premier initiated a change to policy so that grieving families of youth in care can have support from government to seek answers that they desperately need with the tragic loss of life, instead of having to start creating GoFundMe pages to seek those answers from government?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you again to the member for the question. And I can assure the member that our ministry is absolutely committed to making sure that children and youth are kept safe and that they're able to thrive and they're protected every single day. I have every confidence that our staff in the ministry is supporting all children and youth that we're responsible for. And in situations, Honourable Speaker, where there is a tragedy or there is a critical incident, I can absolutely assure the member that our staff takes very swift action and makes sure that all children and youth in any facility or related to any home situation are taken care of, and that their safety is safeguarded and that the family is supported. Honourable Speaker, we have taken many actions to change the whole system of Indigenous child welfare in our province. There is a lot more work to do, but we're working with Indigenous communities and families to make sure that Indigenous children and youth stay connected to their family, to their communities, and to their culture. And we currently have the lowest number of children in care in 30 years and Indigenous children in care in 20 years. Thank you.
The bell ends question period. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call third reading Bill 5.
Member, vote is about to take place. All those participating remotely, please have your voting cards ready. Yep. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move third reading, Bill 5.
Members, again, have your voting cards ready, please. The question is third reading of Bill number 5, 2021, Insurance Corporation Amendment Act 2021. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion is carried. Bill 5, 2021, Insurance Corporation Amendment Act 2021 has passed. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call continued committee stage debate on Bill number 10.
Committee Chair.
The committee will begin shortly. We're just waiting for a technical issue to sort itself out. We'll be starting shortly. Thanks for your patience, members. Thank you, members. All right, the committee is now prepared to begin again on Bill 10, the Supply Act number 1, 2021. We're on Clause 2, and I believe the member for Peace River South wanted to speak to Clause 2. Member.
Thank you, Chair. You know, it's good to get up and continue speaking to Clause 2. I have a couple more days worth of questions on this specific clause. We've been unable to get a lot of answers, so you know, I've got a lot more that I'm excited to bring to the floor. I think over the last couple of days, we've really tried to make the point of how this year is different, and how we really feel that the lack of accountability and transparency of bringing forward a supply bill before a budget does not really meet the test. It doesn't meet the test. It doesn't meet what the expectation is of this House. And without that transparency, without that financial transparency, obviously what we see and possibly we'll see more of is a bunch of gold-plated toilets around the province, which is what we don't want to see happen, which is why we require transparency, which is why we ask for and demand that budgets be presented in this House that we can scrutinize. Now, the minister has said that we will be seeing one in just, I believe her quote was just in just a few short weeks, we will be seeing a budget. But it still brings up the situation that we're in, that the minister, in absence of that budget, is asking this House to approve in this section, this clause, 12.3, approximate $1 billion, referencing again a 13-month-old document. Maybe the minister, we could start off then, as we go throughout today in questions, let's start off by saying that there's only a few areas that government gets its money from. Two of which would be through borrowing or through revenues coming in, mostly through taxation. Can the minister then start by explaining to me this $12.3 billion that she's asking for that's going to now be into a new fiscal year? How much of that is going to be through borrowing and how much is anticipated through revenues?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This bill that is before the House, it is a request, it's an expense request, Mr. Speaker. This is coming before the House to seek supply for until June 30th. To ensure that government can continue to deliver on the services that British Columbians can count on. This request is related only to those programs that I've certainly spent the last couple of days talking about, Mr. Speaker. And I also think, the member had started his opening comments suggesting that there hasn't been a transparency. And I just want to take a moment again to remind all members of this House and British Columbians about the level of reporting out that we have undertaken over this last year, given the extraordinary circumstances, given the extraordinary demand for supplementary spending. And again, we have been reporting throughout this year. Last March, when it was, a state of emergency was declared, we put forward an action plan. And then on July 14th, my predecessor released an economic and fiscal update to provide a summary of spending so that everybody here in this House and all British Columbians would see where measures were being taken and how resources were being spent. And I want to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that report that Carol James provided to this House and to British Columbians, that report was not required by law, but we knew that it was important. It was important to British Columbians that they see how government was responding to the pandemic. And it was based on that that we made that report. And then, of course, Honourable Speaker, we released and reported out on public accounts just a month later, 6 weeks later, on August 31st, detailing, again, government's audited results as part of transparency and accountability. That's required, and we did that. And then, Honourable Speaker, we released our first quarterly report on September 9th, just, I think, another 10 days later, which is certainly well within the legislative requirements, which I believe is September 15th. We shared a report, and it provided, again, extensive details on the pandemic measures announced to date. And then after Q1, we released the Economic Recovery Plan, Mr. Speaker, so that we can continue supporting people, we can continue to support businesses throughout the pandemic, and we can start looking forward to an economic recovery. And then again in December, Mr. Speaker, we released the Fall Economic and Fiscal Update for 2020. It detailed over $10 billion in COVID response spending, as well as recovery measures that continue to support people, businesses, and communities. And it's based on all of that spending, as well as the estimates debate, that we are here before the House with this supply bill.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get back to my initial question in a moment, since the minister didn't answer it. But I also just want to highlight how I find it interesting, some of the comments the minister just made. The minister, I think, just admitted the last official quarterly report was done 6 months ago. That was when we had the last official quarterly report. Now, she can give an update in December, but that's not an official quarterly report with all the details that lay out all of the revenues, expenses. The minister herself said that was talking about update on COVID and COVID spending. When we talk about public accounts, that the minister was just trying to tote how that was released in August or September, that's actually, if I remember correctly, an update on the 1920 fiscal situation. Documents, again, that are a year old. That's requirement. Of course, we want to see those. But we haven't seen the public accounts for this last fiscal year yet, and we won't see those, for my assumption is, 3-4 more months. So the point being, and I know the minister doesn't want to or unable to say, but we're working off old data. We're working off inaccurate information because we haven't been given a full quarterly update since September. We've been given just as the minister said, just her updates on the COVID spending, but those aren't as the legislative requirement of a quarterly update with all of the detailed information. When do we expect to see an actual detailed, proper quarterly report as per laid out in legislation? My assumption is it would have been by now, or it would have been with a budget that would have been presented in February as per every other year. And yes, the minister doesn't have to stand up in the House again and say that I'm wrong. It's actually they're meeting the deadline by April. I realize they're meeting that deadline because the minister and this government changed the deadline. But it's my understanding from what the minister just said, the last official quarterly report we saw was under her predecessor, the former minister of Finance, right before the NDP government called an election. When do we expect the next quarterly update, official quarterly update, with all the proper spending, with all the proper revenues, with all the proper information that's required?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, in my previous response to the member's question, I listed the whole list of opportunities that and steps that government took to share with British Columbians the actions and the spending and the revenues that are coming into government and what's going out in terms of making sure that we're supporting people. And the member seems to somehow disqualify what we call the fall economic and fiscal update for 2020. Now, it sounds to me like perhaps the member didn't read it because it wasn't labeled quarterly, a quarterly report, didn't like the title of it. And perhaps, would have likes the title. But I think what British Columbians want are the details. And the details are in that quarterly report, in that economic update. We called it the Fall Economic and Fiscal Update for 2020, but it lists the capital spends, the revenues, the borrowing, the debt, Mr. Speaker. All of that detail is in that update. And I certainly invite the member to take a look. I invite all British Columbians to take a look, and you'll see in December the actions that government have been taken to provide British Columbians with the transparency that they deserve, to see the actions that government has taken, to see the spending decisions that government has made, and to see the fiscal status of British Columbia.
Member.
Thank you. So is the minister trying to tell this House then that the update, as she's calling it, the fall fiscal update that she gave, met all of the criteria under a quarterly update mandate? Is she trying to tell this House that the one that her predecessor gave in September, that it was no different than that and met all of the same criteria that's required? And if so, does that mean that if she's going to say it does that mean what we expect going forward under this minister is, instead of proper official quarterly updates, as legislation says, that she can just stand up now and just give a proper, vaguer update, I guess, rather than one like her predecessors always used to do?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out to the member opposite, if he compares my predecessor's quarterly report with the fall economic update, what he'll see is the same format, the same tables, the same headings, with updated numbers.
Member.
I just want to remind the minister then, if it's so similar, then why did her government in September change the legal requirements on how quarterly reports would happen?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member may recollect back in the summer when legislation was changed for a fall election. Legislation did not require a second quarterly report in an election year. And when we formed government this fall, we took a look at that and felt that we needed to make sure that there was, at a minimum, an update in anticipation of a budget being delivered later in an election year. And so it's based on that we incorporated and took action to make sure that there was additional accountability by putting in a fall update. And so for all intents and purposes, it's the same information, it's the same tables, it's the same headings, it's the same reporting out with updated numbers. Because let's face it, Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of government and the responsibility of this House to share with British Columbians the fiscal status of operations here. And it's for that purpose that we brought forward the fall fiscal update. It provides an update to all British Columbians on government's spending, recognizing that it has been some time since the first quarterly, and it is incumbent upon us to make sure that British Columbians have access to that information, and it's for that reason that we presented the fall update.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this line of questioning actually was never even on my list of where I was planning on going this morning, but it did take us into an interesting area. I just want to remind the Minister, obviously they were foreshadowing that we were going to a fall election by changing the actual legislation in case there was a fall election, even though they said they had no plans on doing so. But isn't it ironic that all of the legislation that we saw in this House was to prepare and allow this government to not only have a fall election, but to avoid a lot of the reporting or scrutiny because of that, or delaying if we want. Under Section 10 of the, I just went and grabbed it while the Minister was talking, of the Budget Transparency and Accountability Act, it actually talks specifically about the requirements of a quarterly report. But what I find interesting is in the exact changes to the Act that the Minister was talking about an update. Interestingly, there's very strict criteria and definitions of what quarterly update is, but for the one that we saw in December, as the Minister was calling her fall economic update, they specifically left out any criteria or definition of what that would be or what it entails if they chose to do that. But under Section 10, where it talks about the quarterly reports, and I kind of asked this a little earlier, is when do we expect the next one? The Minister is correct where they changed the reporting out in an election year. But it does go on to say in Section 10, subsection 3, that the third quarterly report would be by February 28th. Well, that was 2.5 weeks ago. I don't remember seeing one. I remember seeing one as per what we see in Section 10. It calls for one in September, it calls for one in the fall, and then it says, for the respect for the first 9 months of that fiscal year, a quarterly report must be made public on or before February 28th, which is typically right after a budget, but of course, as we know, they've changed it, so now the third quarterly report would be presented shortly before a budget's presented to this House. So back to my question then, if the Minister's saying the budget's going to be presented in just a few short weeks, do we anticipate a quarterly report that's already appears to have missed that deadline under the legislation? Is there going to be a quarterly report presented to the public before the budget?
Minister.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if the member pulls up, I see that the member does have some paper in front of him. I'm assuming that it is what he was referring to earlier. And if he goes down to section 4A, he will see the clause that speaks to that if the main estimates are being presented within 60 days of that date, of the February 28th date, then there's the obligation is no longer required. And so again, we are bringing forward the main estimates within 60 days of that date. And so it's within that context that we are following the law.
Member.
Well, I do appreciate, and I did read that, and I am aware of that, but it's also making the point that we technically have not had, as per the definitions of the Budget Transparency and Accountability Act, a proper quarterly update for over 6 months. The minister can talk about a fiscal plan. I look through this document, the one that's supposed to guide the minister, and even in the definitions, there's no definition anywhere that I could find, and she can correct me, and I'm more than willing to be proven wrong. I don't see any definition here of what's required for a fiscal plan. But it's very, very, very laid out in Section 10 what's required for a quarterly update. So was it deliberately done by this government when they brought forward the changes last fall to this act to allow themselves to do a fiscal update, but then not put any definitions around what a fiscal update actually is? So does that just leave it up to the minister herself then to decide what she chooses to tell this House and tell the public in a fiscal update? Because I don't see an actual definition of what she has to do, which is why I asked the question of why are we not doing an official quarterly report as per Section 10 under this Accountability Act, which again will lead me into the questions of later on around the spending, where the revenue is coming from and how we're going to spend the money. But because we haven't had a proper, laid out quarterly report with the information that the public deserves. Now the minister can say it's because they changed the rules so they don't have to do it, and now they don't have to because a budget's being presented within that 30 days, 60 days, I was just corrected by the minister, thank you. If that's the case, we're going to have almost 7 months between an official quarterly report and a budget tabled in this House, which is why I asked, we're talking about borrowing or spending another $12.5 billion, and we haven't been given any update of the fiscal situation of this province. So can the minister maybe tell me where it says a fiscal update is the same as and shows it has all the same information as a quarterly report?
Finance Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, the member may want to go back and re-debate a bill that was passed last summer. It's not what we're debating here. That's not what's before the House. He seems to want to go back in time, but that, I would say, is history. The law is the law. And so that's not what's up for debate right now. However, Mr. Speaker, I will point out again, it was incumbent, I felt it was incumbent on me to provide a fiscal update to British Columbians, even when it wasn't required, because people do deserve to see what's been going on. And so that is why we modeled our fiscal update on the Q1 report. And so we took that framework, we took that very framework, and we ran the numbers. And where are we at given that framework? And so it provides a good sense to British Columbians about where we're at. And that was in December. And here we are. Yes, we're 3 months later. In 3 more weeks, we are going to be seeing a budget. Certainly British Columbians, I think, will be pleased to see sort of what's ahead. I know that British Columbians are still struggling with the fact that we're in a pandemic, and this is a pandemic that has hit some really hard and made some real challenges for people in their lives. And we're ready, and hopeful for a good vaccination rollout that will see us move in through to recovery, which I know that British Columbians are itching to do. We'll certainly look forward to those conversations. And Mr. Chair, if I can ask for a 5-minute break, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you, Minister. The House will be recessed for 5 minutes. Thank you, Minister. All right, members, let's bring the committee back into session. We are here with Bill 10, the Supply Act, recognizing the member for Peace River South on Clause 2.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and interesting comments right before that quick recess from the minister saying that, that I'm wanting to bring up history. I'll remind the minister that the actual Supply Act that we're talking about today is referencing history. It's referencing a 13-month-old document that is obsolete. It's historical. It could be in the archives, actually, by now. It's that obsolete. But that's what this minister chose to reference. So yes, I'm bringing up history. I'm bringing up history based on the actual Supply Act that the minister has tabled in the House, which has raised a lot of these questions. Since we're talking about history, just to remind the minister as well that specific legislation and criteria was brought in over 20 years ago. That was brought in specifically to lay out the expectations of the minister, of government, of the protocols around accountability and transparency, making sure budgets are put in a timely way and open and transparent to this House and to the public. And that served us well for 20 years. We talked yesterday about how supply acts in the past have never really had this kind of debate. Well, that's a fair point. That's because they always came in after a tabled budget, as per what was laid out, and worked well and served this House and the province well for the last 20 years. We find ourselves in a situation this last 18 months or less, completely at the responsibility and at the hands of this minister and government. They chose to do this. This government chose to make changes to now present a budget into an entirely new fiscal year. This government chose to change definitions and legislation around the requirements for fiscal updates and quarterly reports. This government chose to change a lot of the regulations and legislations in case there was a fall election, and surprise, surprise, there was shortly after that legislation was in this House. So the minister can try to say that, we're bringing up history. But I remind the minister that all of this entire debate, this entire last couple of days, and this entire piece of legislation as presented could have been completely avoided if we stuck with the practices of this legislation that served so well for 20 years. So even though this government chose to change the criteria, they now have to be accountable to those changes that they made. So I don't even know if I want to formulate a question in there, because I know that the minister will stand up and say, you're right, we chose to make those changes and we're living within the criteria and mandate of the changes we as government made. But with that, I hope that she would acknowledge, is why we are spending time on what many would think is a very simple bill, because it doesn't have any schedules attached that are up to date. We heard the minister just a few moments ago all but admit, yes, there's been fiscal updates, but they don't have to do one now because there's going to be a budget presented soon. So now it is going to be 7 months. And I know the process, so I know we're going to get a very detailed accounting at some point coming soon, that we are going to get a full document of a budget for a 21-22 fiscal year. But again, these are all choices the government's made to now reference an old historic document. So I want to go back to actually the very first question that we started this session out with today that I didn't get really a clear answer from. $12.3 billion this government is asking for. And as we've said, there's no debate on the fact that updates or the supply acts are to, for simplistic words, keep the lights on in government. But the minister wasn't able to tell me, since we haven't had proper accounting to date, and I know we'll get it at some point, but how is this money being funded? Is it going to be through debt, or is it going to be through other sources of government revenue? Where is this $12.3 billion coming from?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out a couple of inaccuracies from my perspective, listening to the member opposite. The fiscal update that we chose to deliver, I chose to deliver in December, will have, there will be 3.5 months between that fiscal update and when budget is presented. Not 7 months, as the member somehow suggested. The member may want to discount the fiscal update that we chose to deliver, and it was a choice. It was a choice by this government to update the public on the fiscal realities, and it was, I think, a good choice. It was a good choice that we made because it is important that British Columbians see how government operations are going. So it's not 7 months, it's 3.5 months between that update and the budget being presented April 20th. The member does make, certainly excellent observations around governments making choices. They absolutely make choices. But people make choices too, Mr. Speaker, and legislation was brought in the summer, and there was an election. And the people made choices, Mr. Speaker, and they chose a new Democrat government. And so they chose a new Democrat government knowing that those changes were in place. And so British Columbians knew full well when they made their choices about who they wanted to govern in this moment in time, they knew full well that changes had been made to the legislation. And so we are doing that work post-election, with people being very clear about their choices as well. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, because I think it's really important that, that we just acknowledge that we all make choices all the time, just as the member is going to be choosing from a list of questions that he has before him. He said there was about 100. I've been counting. We're down now to about 85, I hope. But I also want to point out that, when the budget is presented, members will see, certainly the revenue stream, and will have that information available to them on April 20th.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I appreciate the honesty, I'll say, from the minister through her answer of basically acknowledging the exact point of why we're debating this bill. We're not going to see any information until April 20th, which is why we're having a lot of this debate and discussion. The minister didn't answer my question of $12.3 billion for the next 3 months, how much of that will be through debt or how much through revenue, because we're going to see that in 3 months. So I know the minister doesn't like it when we use the phrase, they're truly asking for a blank check. It's not completely a blank check because the date made out at the top of that check is, I guess now, April 20th. At least it has a dollar and a date on it with no information, though, of where it's going or who it should be made out to. Thus, some of the questions that we're asking. But maybe I'll try this before we break for lunch. Government does make choices. The minister acknowledged that. I acknowledge that. Here's some of the choices that this government has made, which I find it interesting if how much of this is going to be part of the $12.3 billion. Employers' health tax was brought in by this government, creating a revenue stream for them. They've increased gas taxes, an Airbnb tax, additional school taxes, a speculation tax, which we've talked about is now basically targeting and hitting mostly BC residents who are really being penalized. Again, these are choices that this minister and this government has made. They increased corporate tax. We're becoming one of the highest taxed jurisdictions in Canada, which is really concerning to a lot of people as we're going to try to figure out how, and we're looking forward to this throne speech, I guess, on what a plan will be to get us out of this pandemic and to build our economy, meanwhile adding and increasing taxes. But I find it interesting, and I'll maybe leave it with this one. Government makes choices. They've chosen to increase and add 23 new taxes to the people and businesses here in the province of British Columbia under their mandate so far. There are a lot of those, though, that as of April 1st, I'm very curious about. Because the minister says we're not going to see anything until April 20th, but she's still asking for $12.3 billion. And the reason why I raise this is throughout the entire course of this debate, we're supposed to be referencing an old document. But yet the government just announced quietly, I think it was 1 or 2 Fridays ago, that as of April 1st, they're bringing in the tax on people using Netflix. They're bringing in that additional tax on carbonated drinks like pop. Is that actually still going to come in on April 1st? My assumption is they're going to cancel those taxes and they won't be coming in until sometime after or on April 20th, because the minister, in her own words, has said everything we're doing now is supposed to carry us through to a bill on April 20th. And we're supposed to be referencing an old document that didn't have those new taxes in it. So I'm, again, trying to understand why they can do both. They don't want to talk about what their plans are, but the government wants to, through their choices, increase and announce new taxes. So what are the revenues anticipated, I guess, on all these new taxes, and what part of all these new and increased taxes are part of the $12.3 billion that the minister is asking for?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, the two taxes, the digital services as well as the sugary, the carbonated drinks, those were part of Budget 2020, and they were deferred as a result of COVID. So those aren't. That's just a response of government in recognition of the pandemic. But I think it's really important before we break, Mr. Speaker, to recognize the reality, the tax reality here in British Columbia. And I think it's important to recognize how things have changed based on the choices of this government versus the previous BC Liberal government and the choices that they made. Mr. Speaker, because the choices that they made was to give the top 1% massive tax breaks. That's what the choices that they made. And they let speculators profit as housing prices spiked. They also chose to more than double MSP fees, and they raised hydro rates 70%. So we made other choices, Mr. Speaker, as a government. When you take a look in 2017, if you just take a look about the changes that we have made. We brought in last year the Child Opportunity Benefit to begin providing up to $2,600 for a family with 2 kids to provide them with support. Families are saving up to $1,800 every year since we eliminated their flat tax. We got rid of that. We continue to have a very competitive tax regime. We have the second lowest small business tax rate in the country. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the people who are working hard every day to put food on the table, they are finding that they actually have a little bit more money in their pockets. Because when you take a look at what people are paying compared to what they paid under the previous BC Liberal government. If you were a family making $100,000 a year, they are seeing now a 22% reduction in taxes. And if you were making $60,000 a year, you're seeing a 60% reduction in taxes, Mr. Speaker. And that is because of the choices that this government has made. I'm very proud of those choices. Makes life better for British Columbians, and I look forward to some more of this, Mr. Speaker. So I move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Thank you, Minister. Members have heard the question. All of those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Minister.
Committee Chair.
Committee of the Whole on Bill 10 reports progress and seeks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Minister?
At the next sitting.
Government House Leader.
I move the House to now adjourn.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion is carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 this afternoon.